ECOWAS has decided to uphold the initial sanctions already imposed on Mali and on the transition authorities. ECOWAS has already decided to impose additional economic and financial sanctions, which are withdrawal of all ECOWAS ambassadors in Mali, closure of land and air borders between ECOWAS countries and Mali, suspension of all commercial and financial transactions between ECOWAS member states and Mali, with the exception of the following products: essential consumer goods, pharmaceutical products, medical supplies and equipment, including materials for the control of COVID-19, petroleum products and electricity. Freeze of assets of the Republic of Mali in ECOWAS central banks, freeze of assets of the Malian state and the state enterprises and parastatals in commercial banks, and also the suspension of Mali from all financial assistance and transactions from all financial institutions.
So, ECOWAS taking tough action against Mali. Well, let's find out a little bit more about what all of this means. And we're now joined by Adama Gaye, who's a Senegalese author and political commentator. Thanks very much indeed for joining us and welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. Good evening.
Do you think this action by ECOWAS is long overdue? Some might have thought that this was required right at the time that the coup took place.
I do believe that actually this is a decision that is overstretched. It is extreme, this type of decision they have taken, because literally this amounts to creating an asphyxia of the economy and of the society of Mali. It goes beyond the military people who took over almost 1.5 years ago. So the problem is this: why are not Malian people in the street, like in Sudan, demonstrating to call for an end of military rule? That indicates that there is something to the coup that was done in Mali against the civilian rule. And there are some internal problems that need to be fixed. Additionally, it is strange that West African leaders, ECOWAS, are becoming so tough against the military rule when actually almost 1.5 years ago in another country, neighboring Guinea-Conakry, when a civilian ruler, Alpha Condé, was acting in a tyrannical way, killing people in the streets and preventing democracy from being conducted in Guinea-Conakry. And now these people, these African leaders, are trying to appear as if they were the apostle of democracy in West Africa. I unfortunately have the feeling that most of them, principally the Francophone countries, there are 6 of them almost within the 15 West African bloc, they are acting under the direction, the instruction of France. And that is very bad as a decision that has been made. They should have negotiated, mediated, instead of taking this extreme position, which may end up leading the community factor that needs to be taken into account. The absence of President Buhari of Nigeria. Nigeria represents alone the GDP that is the equivalent of the total amount of the other 14 countries. So if the president didn't go, that indicates that maybe the Nigerians are not happy with France's meddling and controlling of the ECOWAS in order to direct it and pull behind ECOWAS the international community to supporting its maneuvers within West Africa Francophone countries.
What is the gain for France if what you're saying is true, for them to control what's happening in Mali? Yes, we've seen that they've been reaching out to Russia and other countries in recent years. Is it just about influence?
France is, let's say, a middle power, as one of its president, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, said in the 1970s. Without European, African countries, it's a former colonial powers. France would be far below among the leading nations in the world. But today, with its former colonies, it still continues to have a prestige to show to the rest of the world, and it has somehow a legitimacy to claim a seat at the Security Council of the United Nations. So this is very important for its name and standing, its aura. France is a country that likes those kind of things. Don't forget that it has always been an imperial power and wanted to cling to imperial positions. So today, France is feeling the pinch with the arrival of foreign forces like the Wagner group from Russia, called upon by the Malians. And also, France is being rejected massively by the West African Francophone youngsters. They don't want this new colonial power to continue. And within ECOWAS, France knows that it cannot influence most of the Anglophone countries, so it is using its puppets. Most of the Francophone leaders who are trying to cling to power, who don't respect the democratic norms, the kind of Macky Sall or Alassane Ouattara, and to name a few, are not always the type of democratic leaders, and they are now singing the tune of France, but France wants them to act so in order to continue having its companies doing business in Francophone Africa, and also to sustain its economy that is almost decaying because it no longer has the strength that it used to have in the past. Indeed, this is a game, a do or die game for France to doing this in Francophone Africa, using now ECOWAS. By the way, I'm a former director at ECOWAS. I used to be director of communication of ECOWAS. And this kind of things is not new. When we did the ECOWAS new treaty, revised treaty in 1993, France almost blocked the process by forcing Francophone countries that it mobilized within a subgrouping called UEMOA, it's the Francophone version, to part way almost from the community and force us, the ECOWAS, to no longer follow the rules that were accepted then by the then African organization, OAU, to form regional bloc. France wanted to have its own bloc within ECOWAS, and it is continuing to do the same today. Another aspect, it is a strange coincidence to see, for instance, that Mr. Emmanuel Macron, the French president, has become this month of January the president of the European Union. At the same time, strangely, the president of Senegal, Macky Sall, who has not been respecting human rights in our country, who has been killing youngsters, and who has been involved in theft of natural resources, is going to become, to the disadvantage of Africa, the chairman of the African Union from 6th or 7th of February. And literally 10 days later in Brussels, France has managed to bring Mr. Sall to organize an African Union-Europe summit to discuss the future. Somehow, France is using its puppets to maintain its influence towards. It is also using them to ensure that the bill is footed by outside forces. It wants, for instance, to have the United Nations put money behind
Mr. Gaye, we are running out of time, and I promise you we're going to have another conversation just about the French influence on the continent at a future date. But getting back to Mali, it seems then that tough as these sanctions might be, actually they'll affect citizens much more than the military junta.
Yes, the population will suffer. The military junta may try to cling to power. We know one thing. Sanctions, the world over, have not always worked. Maximum 10% of them work. Sanctions in Iran, sanctions in Nicaragua and elsewhere, sanctions in Venezuela, they have not always yielded the result that the proponents of those sanctions wanted. In the case of Mali, indeed, it may affect the populations of Mali, but it will have also spill over negative effect within the region. Because don't forget that there are many terrorists and extremist forces within Mali. There is a risk, a real risk, that it may spill over to other countries. Remember that after the intervention organized, masterminded by France in Libya in 2011, that's when you started having those asymmetric forces leaving Libya and going within the Sahel region and using forces and creating the mayhem that we know today. So when you start these kind of sanctions, you never know what would be the spillover effect and who would be concerned. In a time when we are facing a serious COVID crisis, I do believe literally that ECOWAS leaders should never have taken this tough position. The Malian people are very proud people. Don't forget that they have a long history. When you know the history of Tombouctou, the history of the Kurufugan Charter,
right.
that was one of the
Mr. Gaye,
democratic charter in the world.
Yeah, so, again, I have to interrupt because of time, but the military junta is looking to hand over power 2026. I wonder, could there be a compromise? Because 2026 seems quite far out to have a country being led by a military since 2020. Maybe if they reduce the time, ECOWAS might be willing to compromise?
But this is precisely what the Malians have said. They said this is a basis of negotiation. They should have avoided, in my mind, this extreme position done under the influence of France. They should have organized a mediation, a meeting in Bamako with the junta in order to make sure that they will have a safe-facing solution to make sure that they will accept at least a middle-of-the-road solution. It would be maybe 2 years or 1.5 years, just to give them a chance to exit gracefully and also fix some of the internal problems. Once again, the populations in Bamako are not demonstrating. They are not calling for a return immediately of a civilian rule. Some political parties who have created this mayhem are the ones that have been claiming for a return to democracy. We have tried the road twice after the demise of President Toumani Touré and the demise of Ibeka, two former presidents of Mali. But that didn't work. Why should they be rushing? They should have organized it in an orderly manner, and they have not done it. Why this urge? Why this precipitation? That's a big question. And I think this question is something that most African countries have to respond to make sure that it is not from outside that the decisions are made in order to manage the conflict within our countries, using those conflicts in order to increase leverages for foreign countries within Africa.
Mr. Gaye, thank you so much indeed for joining us. Your insights greatly appreciated tonight. Thank you for your time.
Always, my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good evening.